Elena Brooks stood at the edge of the open grave, her umbrella trembling faintly in her hand. The other hand rested instinctively on the swell of her belly, 7 months along, as if to shield the fragile life within from the storm outside. At her side, 10-year-old Ethan gripped her coat sleeve so tightly his knuckles turned white. His small body leaned into her, as though afraid she might disappear if he let go. All around them, whispers floated, cutting sharper than the chill in the air. "Such a shame. He was so young," murmured one voice. "She won't last a month without him. Not with the Carters against her," another replied, low enough for Elena to hear. Across the grave, Richard Carter stood stiff and unyielding, his shoulders square beneath a perfectly tailored black coat. At his side, his daughter Victoria clutched her handbag like a badge of superiority. Neither of them shed a tear. Their eyes, cold and dry, rested on Elena not with grief, but with the quiet disdain of people who had never accepted her. Not when she married Daniel, not when she worked beside him late into the night building their floral shop, not even now as she buried the man who had been the center of her world. The final thud of earth struck the coffin, and something inside Elena broke with it. Her shoes sank into the soggy grass, and the chill crept through the seams, numbing her feet. She wanted to collapse, to let the grief swallow her whole, but Ethan's hand squeezed tighter. She straightened, for him if not for herself. Above the silence, a crow cawed and took flight, its wings black against the bruised sky. The sound jolted her, as though reminding her that life, cruel and relentless, would go on whether she was ready or not. When the crowd began to disperse, Elena lingered. She whispered a prayer only the soil could hear, words breaking in her throat. Then she turned toward the waiting lawyer, her steps heavy but determined. If Daniel had left anything behind, it was hope that she and their children would not be left defenseless. What Elena did not know, as she walked away from the grave with Ethan clinging to her side, was that her greatest humiliation would soon open the door to her most unexpected victory. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. For most, it was a place of order, of justice. For Elena Brooks, it felt like a stage where she had been cast as the outsider from the very beginning. She sat stiffly in the leather chair, Ethan close by her side, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. The boy's eyes darted nervously from face to face, already sensing what his young heart couldn't yet put into words. This was not going to be fair. Across the desk sat Richard Carter and his daughter, Victoria. Their presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Richard with his cold authority, Victoria with that cruel smile she had worn since the day Daniel brought Elena home. Neither tried to mask their disdain. For them, this was not grief, it was opportunity. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. To my wife, Elena Brooks, I leave the house on 47 Maple Hollow Road, all my shares in Brooks Floral, and my 1972 pickup truck. For a brief moment, Elena's heart lifted. The house, the business, even the old truck Daniel loved so much. Relief washed through her chest, loosening the tightness in her shoulders. Daniel had kept his promise. Even in death, he had tried to protect her. But before she could breathe fully, laughter cut through the air. Victoria leaned back in her chair, lips curled in mockery. "Oh, no. That's not how this is going to work." Elena blinked. "Excuse me." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. His voice was low, sharp, and filled with something darker than grief. "That house, that business, they are Carter property. They've always been. You may have married my son, but you do not carry our name. You do not carry our blood. You are not one of us." The words struck harder than any slap. Elena's fingers curled against her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the venom spilling across the desk. The lawyer frowned, flipping through the papers. "That's not what's written here, Mr. Carter." Richard slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. "Don't play games with me. If she wants a fight, let her take us to court. Let's see how far she gets. Pregnant, broke, and black. No judge in this county will side with her. Not against us." Silence fell. Heavy. Suffocating. Elena felt every eye in the room pressing against her skin, reminding her of what she already knew. She had never been welcomed into this family. From the very first day, when Daniel introduced her as his wife, whispers had followed her. "She's not like us. Why would he marry her?" Always said in half voices, but loud enough for her to hear. Now, in this office, it was no longer whispered. It was declared openly, cruelly, in front of her son. Ethan's small hand slid into hers under the table. She looked at him, his eyes wide, his lip trembling, and she knew she couldn't break here. Not in front of him. She wanted to scream, to remind them that she had worked side by side with Daniel building Brooks Floral from a single rented storefront. That it was her hands arranging the flowers at dawn, her back carrying boxes, her voice greeting customers. She had given everything. And still, in their eyes, she was only the outsider who had taken their son away. 15 minutes later, she walked out of that office with nothing but a cold set of keys to a house everyone called worthless. Behind her, Richard's voice still echoed, low and poisonous. "You should be grateful we're even letting you keep that old place. It's more than you deserve." The drizzle outside turned to steady rain, soaking her coat and plastering Ethan's hair to his forehead. He looked up at her with questions she couldn't answer. She tightened her grip on his hand, whispering only one thing to herself as they walked away. "Hold on, Elena. Hold on. For him. For the baby. Hold on." What she didn't yet know was that the house they mocked, the house no one wanted, was the very place Daniel had chosen to hide the secret that would change everything. Maple Hollow Road stretched out like a forgotten memory, cracked pavement winding through trees that bent low, their branches whispering in the wind. At the very end of that lonely road stood the house Elena had inherited, if one could even call it a house. The roof sagged like tired shoulders. Paint peeled in jagged strips, exposing gray wood that looked as though it had given up decades ago. A shutter banged loosely in the breeze. The yard was a jungle of weeds, waist-high, crawling with shadows. From the gate, the place didn't look like a home. It looked like punishment. Ethan froze, his sneakers sinking into the mud. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mom, this is it." Elena couldn't bring herself to answer. Her throat burned with words she couldn't say. That this was all they had left. That the Carters had made sure of it. That this was the place they wanted her to rot. She managed only a nod, her lips pressed tightly together. When she forced the front door open, a wave of damp air rolled over them. It smelled of mildew and rust, of something that had been left behind too long. Dust swirled in the pale light that filtered through broken blinds. The wallpaper sagged in strips, stained with water and age. In the kitchen, a single cabinet door clung to its hinge, whining every time it moved. The sink dripped steadily, a hollow echo that filled the silence. Ethan stepped carefully, his small face twisted in discomfort. "It stinks, Mom." Elena crouched down to meet his eyes, brushing back a lock of hair damp with sweat and rain. "I know, baby. But we'll make it better. Somehow." Inside, her heart screamed. This was not a house. This was exile. That night, the storm broke. Rain hammered the roof, slipping through cracks and dripping onto the warped floorboards. Elena gathered every scrap of fabric they had into one corner of the bedroom, wrapping Ethan tightly in a blanket. She sat beside him, her hand resting protectively over her belly as she listened to each leak, each groan of the weary walls. Through the window, lightning split the sky, illuminating her reflection for just an instant. Her face looked hollow, eyes rimmed with grief, skin tired from too many sleepless nights. And she thought of Richard Carter's words echoing in her head. "You may have married my son, but you'll never be one of us." He hadn't needed to say the rest. He didn't need to explain that what he really meant was that her skin would always set her apart, that in his world she was and always would be the outsider. He wanted her to remember that every time she looked in a mirror. The weight of it pressed against her chest, heavy and cruel. She closed her eyes, letting the tears burn without falling. Ethan stirred beside her, mumbling in his sleep, "Daddy!" Elena's heart shattered all over again. She pulled him closer, holding him as tightly as her trembling arms would allow. Then she placed her other hand on her belly, feeling the faint kick of life inside. A reminder. A promise. "They want me to break," she whispered into the dark. "They want me to disappear. But I won't. Not for them. Not ever." The house groaned as the wind rattled its broken bones, but Elena sat straighter, her jaw set. She didn't know how, but she would survive this place. She would turn exile into strength. What she could not yet see, what no one could, was that this broken house, meant to humiliate her, carried a secret Daniel had hidden deep within its walls. A secret that would change everything. Days blurred together in the old house on Maple Hollow Road. Each morning, Elena rose before the sun, sweeping floors that seemed to gather dust faster than she could clear it. She patched leaks with rags, pushed broken furniture into corners, and tried to make the space look less like a ruin and more like a refuge. But no matter how hard she worked, the walls whispered reminders of her humiliation. Every stain, every crack, every shadow seemed to echo the Carter family's laughter. Richard's words repeated in her mind like a curse. "You're not one of us. Be grateful we let you have this." Ethan did his best to be brave. He drew stick figures on scraps of paper, taped them to the walls as if to claim the house as their own. At night, he whispered to his unborn sister through Elena's belly, promising to keep her safe. But she could hear the tremor in his voice. He was only 10. He had lost his father, his home, his stability, everything but her. One afternoon, as Elena scrubbed the corner of the living room wall, her sponge snagged on something unusual. At first, she thought it was just another patch of rot. But when she pressed harder, the plaster crumbled, revealing the edge of metal beneath. Her breath caught. She dropped the sponge and brushed the dust away with trembling hands. There, hidden behind a thin layer of plaster, was a small door, iron, rusted, but unmistakable. A safe. Her heart pounded. For a long moment, she simply stared, unable to move. Daniel. Had he known? Had he left this for her? She whispered his name, barely a breath. Daniel. With shaking fingers, she searched along the edges, until she found a dial, stiff from years of disuse. She twisted it, the sound of metal grinding filling the silent room. For a moment, she feared it would never open. But then, click. The door swung inward with a groan, and the smell of old metal and cedar drifted out. Inside, neatly stacked, were bars of gold wrapped in cloth, certificates and documents bound with string, and, tucked on top, a folded envelope with her name written in Daniel's handwriting. Elena's knees gave out, and she sank onto the floor. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. "My dearest Elena," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to protect you in life. But I swore I would always protect you, and I meant it. This house was never worthless. Inside it, I built a safeguard, something no one could take from you. Use it wisely. Use it for yourself, for Ethan, for our daughter. This is my love, hidden not in words, but in the walls that will shelter you when the world tries to cast you out." The tears came hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks, blurring the words. She pressed the letter to her chest, rocking slightly as if holding Daniel one last time. Ethan appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed. "Mom? What is it?" Elena beckoned him closer, pulling him into her arms. She kissed his forehead, her tears wetting his skin. "It's hope, baby," she whispered. "Daddy left us hope." For the first time since the funeral, Elena felt something stir inside her chest. Not relief, not victory, but strength. The Carters had wanted her to crumble in this place. Instead, she would rise from it. The house they had given her to break her was about to become the place where she rebuilt everything. Elena didn't rush. She knew better than to flaunt what she had found. If the Carters even suspected the house held value, they would circle back like vultures. So she kept the secret buried deep, just as Daniel intended. At first, she only took what she desperately needed. A single gold bar, sold quietly to a discreet dealer in the next county. The money bought food, medicine, and clothes for Ethan. For the first time in weeks, the boy ate until he was full, his cheeks round with life again. Elena herself bought prenatal vitamins and fresh vegetables, luxuries she hadn't dared hope for. The second time, she took a little more. Enough to repair part of the roof, patch the leaks, and bring warmth back into the house. Each improvement made the space feel less like a tomb and more like a beginning. Ethan's drawings of stick figures on the walls were soon joined by sketches of flowers, birds, and suns. His laughter, faint at first, began to echo through the rooms. But Elena didn't stop there. Daniel had left her more than money. He had left her purpose. She had always loved flowers, had spent years with Daniel arranging bouquets in their shop. Now, with a portion of the gold, she rented a small corner stand at the weekend market. The first morning, she set up a simple table, arranging second-hand vases filled with wholesale blooms. Her hands moved instinctively, trimming stems, tying ribbons, coaxing beauty from the ordinary. People stopped. They noticed. "Who's the new florist?" someone whispered. "She's good. Really good," another replied. Elena smiled faintly, though her heart raced. She remembered every birthday of her first customers, every anniversary, and with each bouquet, she slipped in a sprig of baby's breath, her quiet signature of hope. The whispers about her past didn't bother her anymore. "Isn't that the widow Brooks? I heard she lost everything. I thought she was living in that old house. Let them talk." She was building something stronger than their judgment. Week by week, she reinvested every dollar into better flowers, sturdier vases, sharper tools. Her stand grew. Customers returned, not only for the bouquets, but for the way Elena made them feel seen and valued. Meanwhile, the Carter family business, the empire they had stolen, was faltering. Orders went unfilled. Bills piled up. Rumors of debt spread quietly across town. Sometimes Elena overheard customers mention it at her stall. She only smiled softly, arranging lilies and roses, letting the fragrance mask the satisfaction stirring in her chest. One evening, as she locked up her little stall, Ethan slipped his hand into hers. "Mom," he said, his voice full of pride, "this feels like home again." Elena bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "It's just the beginning." Because she knew now, Daniel hadn't just left her gold. He had left her a chance. And she would not waste it. The Carter family had always believed their name alone was enough to command respect. For decades, their flower shops dotted the county, polished fronts that hid the bitterness behind them. When Daniel was alive, His hard work and Elena's devotion had kept the family business thriving. But now, without them, the cracks began to show. At first, it was small things. Orders not delivered on time. Bouquets that wilted too quickly. Bills paid late. Customers who left dissatisfied and never returned. Richard brushed it off, blaming suppliers, blaming workers, blaming everyone but himself. Victoria tried to mask the decline with charm and false smiles, but word spread faster than she could silence it. Meanwhile, Elena's little stall bloomed. Her bouquets carried life, precision, and something no Carter arrangement had ever held: love. People noticed. They began to whisper, "Have you seen the Widow Brooks flowers? They last longer. They feel different. Like she cares." Each week, more customers drifted away from Carter Floral and toward Elena's corner of the market. She never advertised, never gloated. She simply worked harder, investing in better flowers, brighter displays, warmer smiles. By the time autumn came, Carter Floral was drowning. Unpaid invoices piled on Richard's desk. Creditors called daily. Whispers turned to headlines. Carter Floral faces bankruptcy. Debt mounts for once prominent family. Elena read the news one evening while rocking baby Lily to sleep. Ethan sat nearby, drawing in his notebook. She didn't smile. Not outwardly. But deep in her chest, there was a quiet sense of balance, like the scales of justice at last, tipping where they belonged. The Carters had stolen everything they could from her, trying to reduce her to nothing. And yet, here they were, undone not by her revenge, but by their own greed and incompetence. On Sundays, when Elena walked past the old Carter shop on Main Street, she would see the darkened windows, the "For Lease" sign taped crookedly to the glass. And she would keep walking, pushing her daughter's stroller with Ethan at her side, never slowing her pace. Because victory, she realized, didn't need to be loud. Sometimes, the sweetest triumph was silence. It was late afternoon when the bell above Elena's shop door rang. The scent of lilies and fresh eucalyptus filled the air, mingling with the golden light that streamed through the windows. Elena was wrapping a bouquet for a young bride, her fingers steady, her mind calm. Then she saw them. Richard Carter stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, his once immaculate suit frayed at the elbows. Behind him, Victoria hovered, her face pale, stripped of the sharp superiority she had worn like armor all her life. They looked smaller somehow, as though time and ruin had carved away the power they once carried. "Elena," Richard began, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "We're in a difficult place. The house is gone. The business too. We have nowhere else to go." Victoria's eyes darted around the shop, taking in the polished shelves, the carefully arranged bouquets, the steady stream of customers outside the window. Her lips trembled as realization flickered in her gaze. This was what Elena had built from the ashes they left her in. Elena didn't answer at first. She finished tying the ribbon around the bouquet, tucking a sprig of baby's breath into the arrangement. She handed it to the bride with a gentle smile, her hands never trembling. Only when the door closed behind her customer did Elena turn back to face them. "I remember," she said, her voice calm, measured. "I remember the day you told me the only thing I deserved was that house. That my children and I weren't worthy of anything better. That I would break." Her eyes lingered on Victoria, who lowered her gaze, unable to meet them. Then Elena looked back at Richard. "You wanted me to vanish, to be humiliated, to disappear. Instead, I built something that's mine, something you could never take." Richard swallowed hard. His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. For the first time, there was no authority in his voice, no steel in his presence. Only defeat. "We just need a place to stay," he whispered. "Only for a while." Elena let out a slow breath. Not anger. Not hatred. Something deeper. A strength they would never understand. "I'm afraid," she said softly but firmly. "This space is too small to hold the weight of people who once tried to break me." The words hung in the air, sharper than any blade. Richard's shoulders sagged further. Victoria turned toward the door, her eyes glassy with humiliation. They left without another word, the small bell above the door chiming their exit. Elena stood still for a long moment, her hands resting on the counter. When she finally exhaled, it wasn't triumph she tasted. It was freedom. The sun was setting over Maple Hollow, spilling golden light through the shop windows. The petals of lilies and roses glowed as though the evening itself had chosen to bless the space. Elena sat at the counter, baby Lily sleeping in a basket beside her, while Ethan sketched quietly on a notebook across from them. The room was warm, alive. Customers came not only for flowers but for the feeling Elena gave them, being remembered, being valued. She knew their names, their stories, their milestones. Each bouquet carried not just beauty, but kindness. Through the window, the old Carter floral shop still stood on Main Street, empty and lifeless, a for lease sign crooked in the glass. Elena no longer looked at it with bitterness. To her, it was only a shadow, a reminder of a life she had left behind. Her gaze shifted instead to her children. Ethan, who had stood beside her through nights of hunger and rain. Lily, born into a home rebuilt from ashes. They were her true inheritance, her living proof that strength could grow in the most broken soil. On the shelf behind her sat Daniel's letter, framed simply in wood. She read it often, but not because she needed reassurance. She read it as a reminder that even in death, he had believed in her when no one else did. And he had been right. Outside, the world still judged. Some whispers never stopped. But Elena had learned something more powerful than approval. She had learned the peace of not needing it. The house the Carters had mocked still stood on Maple Hollow Road. No longer sagging, no longer drowning in weeds. It was painted fresh, the porch sturdy again, the garden full of blooms Ethan had planted with her. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't grand. But it was theirs. Elena stepped outside the shop as dusk settled, baby Lily in her arms, Ethan running ahead to lock the gate. She looked down the quiet street, the air filled with the fragrance of flowers, and let a smile touch her lips. She hadn't just survived. She had built a life from ruins. And the greatest wealth she carried wasn't gold, or certificates, or even the house. It was the unshakable truth that no amount of hate could break her. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt free. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't loud. They don't come with applause or headlines. They come in silence, in the steady growth of a flower, in the laughter of a child, in the strength of a woman who refused to break. Elena Brooks was never supposed to win. At least, not in the eyes of those who tried to crush her. But she did. Not through revenge, not through hate, but through resilience, love, and the quiet courage to keep going. And maybe that's the lesson her story carries for all of us, that even in the ruins, there can be roots. Even in rejection, there can be rebirth. And sometimes, the very place meant to destroy us becomes the ground where we rise again. If Elena's journey moved you, don't just scroll away. Tell us in the comments, what part of her story touched you the most? Hit the like button to support these powerful stories. And subscribe, so you never miss the next one. Because who knows, maybe the reminder you need will be in the next story we tell.